December. So I was trying to get here, had to drop kids off at school. My other children are with us and excited to be at work with me. So thank you guys for taking the time to come down. I'm not sure, I know that Chris was talking about fire specifically and IMO. There's also something interesting that I did using Korean natural farming. This isn't really on the agenda, but I do want to touch in on it because it's important. So 3 years ago, I think, when the fires were hitting really badly, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I've lost every year, right? But when southern Humboldt County actually got hit with ash, there was a good dusting of ash that kind of went all over everything, and it was right towards the end of season. And it caused a lot of problems for a lot of the fruits, vegetables, and especially the cannabis, right? The ash got into the buds, it was impossible to get out. People around there with leaf blowers, and we were hitting it and shaking it. I happen to run a fairly small farm with a very, very, very small crew. For Mendocino, it's a mid-sized farm because it's 18,000 square feet. For you guys, it's a tiny farm because Lake County, I think, is unlimited. For Humboldt County, smallish, but definitely not something that we had time to be knocking ash off of plants 2 to 3 times a day. It was impossible. We tried covering with Agribon, it blew off. It was just like, we had all kinds of issues. What we also noticed was that as the ash fell and dusted the soil, our plants started showing imbalances within about a week to 2 weeks. So we started seeing some significant problems with the way the plants were mobilizing nutrients. So I utilized, through Chris's help, we were in Colorado at the time, and he remembered a time when the tomato farmers on the Big Island of Hawaii, the volcano erupted and covered everything in ash. And there were a few farmers that were using Korean natural farming, or KNF, and they used some of their inputs to mitigate the soil and rebalance it. And what they found is they actually had a successful season, whereas a lot of the others that didn't do this, they couldn't get their soil balanced to utilizing normal agricultural nutrients. So I did a quick trial. I will try and find it and put a special tag on it. What is this called? This is the MAP, right? Okay, so yeah, I'll tag it MAP Regenerative Farming so that you guys can find it on Instagram as soon as I find it. But I ran a trial where I did a high level of Epsom salts and FAA, fish amino acid, which is nitrogen. The idea being that I wanted to balance the calcium in the ash and the potassium. And what we found was that it worked really, really well. Like the plants that I utilized high levels on, not normally, not excessively high, and I lay it all out on Instagram. I should have looked it up and given you guys a little better details, so I apologize. But those plants were phenomenal by the last month. It was crazy the difference that it made. So when we're talking about fire and we're talking about natural farming, it's not just about fungal also, it's about balancing our soils again. And it's actually fairly simple to do. So not to say that you should run out and do exactly what I did if you get hit by fire or ash, but if you have imbalances in your plants, sometimes considering our soils aren't necessarily deficient, sometimes things are just out of whack, and to get it back into balance, even if everything's too high, at least it's balanced and your plant can actually handle it better. So that's a total side note, right? But it is important, especially as we're driving down here and seeing, all the fire-scathed land that has been happening. And I hate to say it, but I kind of expect that we'll probably be seeing more of that this year. I don't think this is just gonna be, normal par for the course. So get prepared ahead of time. Know that it's not the end of the world. There are ways to mitigate things. I also did create a solution for getting the ash off of the plants themselves. Time intensive, but it worked really well, which was using, again, KNF inputs, high level of vinegar, and the vinegar then balanced out the alkaline nature of the ash, loosened it from the surface of the buds, and then we were able to wash it off. And it worked really, really well. Again, took a lot of time and labor, but I know people that are still sitting on ash contaminated weed from 4 years ago. So on to the questions. So Korean natural farming, one of the things that I know Kristen wanted me to talk about to you guys is how cost effective it is. One of the reasons that we are still a functional farm and that our farm is still I'm not going to say highly profitable because I don't think any cannabis in California is highly profitable anymore, but we're not completely under the water and upside down. And a large part of that is that the money we've spent on inputs is minimal. So over the last 3 or 4 years, I think, last year, my biggest expense was alfalfa straw or alfalfa hay, I should say, for mulching. And that's just because we have so little water on the farm that we didn't want to use any type of companion plants or cover crops that would use water. So we went with alfalfa. Other than that, like, I don't really amend my fields anymore. I don't really fertilize. You know, when you're getting started with Korean natural farming, you do want to be kind of utilizing the different inputs that we make, the ferments and things, to bolster your plants, to get them above, you know, that struggle level. Because as you're getting your soil sweetened, right, it still takes time. 3 years is what we're finding to be like the exact point when you can kind of back off and not really fertilize anymore. But that 3 years is really important that you stay on top of everything. So all the IMO that Chris was talking about, right? Indigenous microorganisms, getting our soil fungally dominant. That really is the very, very key of this, and it's really cheap to do. You're talking about, you know, I don't know, 10 to 20 bucks worth of rice every year, maybe 100 bucks if you want to go big. Probably about, I think I've spent $200 on brown sugar in the last couple of years. I made a very large scale run of Oriental Herbal Nutrient. That's going to be your most expensive input. And that is a, what would I call it? An immune booster, if you will. So it suppresses pathogens, right? So especially when we're talking about certain plants, tomato crops, you know, cannabis, obviously. What other ones? Peppers, I think, get hit pretty badly. I'm a horrible pepper grower, by the way. I can't seem to make it work. I had 1 year with this amazing red pepper, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. And the next year, all my peppers died again. So peppers and I don't get along great. But that being said, you know, if you want to suppress the pathogens that hit those plants specifically, you need to bolster the immune system of your soil and your plant itself. So Oriental Herbal Nutrient does that. And it's also really good for human health. So we take it all the time in my house. We don't really get sick a whole lot anymore. Although I haven't been taking it for a while, so. Maybe I've sweetened my own system enough that I don't need to do it every day anymore. I don't know. But again, so, you know, the basis of this, though, is that over the last 3 or 4 years, I've probably spent less than $3,000 on inputs on 18,000 square feet of cultivation. So that's massive. That doesn't include my 2,400 square feet of vegetables at home, doesn't include my 6 personal use plants, doesn't include the vegetables on the farm, it does include all that. That money was spent on not only the 18,000 square feet, but also all of the subsistence gardening that we do as well. So it's hugely impactful how cheap this is. You're utilizing things like eggshells. You're utilizing things like, you know, the rice, but that's very cheap. And after that, it's wood chips. Okay, you can use waste products that are from different places. Wood chips you can get for free, or you can do it yourself. So labor is kind of higher. You expect more on labor costs or expect to work more yourself. But the money that you spend to get your plants through to harvest is very, very, very little. As we continue down with cannabis, and as we see that, you know, federal regulation is on the brink for reals this time, you want to be mindful of the things that we think are probably going to happen. More taxation, more regulation. I mean, God knows what kind of system they're going to put in place. We suspect it may be like California's, where there will be a required distributor in it, okay? Because, you know, we got to protect everybody from this dangerous plant. So if that does happen, that profit margin that we're seeing even in California, which is minimal to non-existent, is probably something that's going to happen at the federal level too. So if you're spending, you know, $15,000 on fertilizers every year, that might be something that you can't afford to do anymore. Our farm, when I was charting this, I went back after I learned KNF, I went to a 5-day class, I came back, dabbled with it the end of the first year, and then went full bore into it the next year. And my whole goal was to see how little money I could spend. How can I get my crop to a successful harvest with full health and, you know, really good weed that will sell without spending money? And we took it from my average the year before was a little over $2 per square foot was what we had spent on inputs. And our labor as well to apply the inputs, okay? The next year, when I did only KNF, we spent less than 20 cents per square foot. So from $2 to 20 cents, huge drop. And I also had enough inputs to last me through the beginning of the next season. So that didn't just cover the one season. It was a season and a half. I think I still have herbs actually for Oriental Herbal Nutrient from that initial run that I'm still utilizing to this day, 5 years later. So it's something that really made me feel very, very comfortable about, like, for example, last year we lost an entire second run to mold. We harvested, we put everything in our drying shed. My neighbor was doing road work, he didn't finish rocking it, and the road was impassable, and we couldn't get out to the farm. Generators shut down, gone, the whole thing. I was like, oh man. But it wasn't something that, you know, I was like, oh great, I just dumped $20,000 into that and it's not coming back. I was like, meh, cost of that was like, I don't know, 25 cents. It's not that big of a deal. It's, you know, it was definitely a kick in the pants and it sucked, but it wasn't the end of the farm. It wasn't something that I couldn't recover from because I knew that it wasn't that much money lost as far as money put in. I knew that this year coming up, I still have the money I need to get clones or do whatever I need to do. I know that I have most of my inputs already ready for this year. And it's huge. I know that Kristen also wanted me to bring a sample of WSC, which is water-soluble calcium, and I did not do that. I apologize, but I can run you guys through it. From what I understand, you guys' soil is very low in calcium. Okay, so how do you get that bolstered up? So WSC, water-soluble calcium, is a foliar spray for the most part. You can soil drench it as well. I like foliars when you can, just because the plant takes it up faster, right? If you want to get it into your soil though, literally you could crush eggshells and, you know, spread them out every single year. It's a really great way. It's a slow release though, so it's not going to input quickly. So that might not be bioavailable to your plant for a long time coming. So if you need something that's immediate, really, really simple. Take your used eggshells, wash them first. I learned this lesson, okay? If you don't rinse them, it doesn't ruin the input, but it makes it stink. Although it can be a great deer deterrent, so, you know, theoretically, you might want to do that. But really, you want to get all the protein out of the eggshell. So rinse it, you put it in a bucket. I have 2 buckets under my kitchen. One is for rinsed eggshells, one is for not rinsed eggshells. Because I have 5 kids, and so they're not always the most mindful of that. Once they're clean, you can char them in a pan over a cook stove, ideally outside, because this takes about 2 hours, an hour to 2 hours. It takes a really long time to do this. But as they're cooking, they'll start cracking and breaking, and you're going to fan it to winnow off the membrane of the eggshell. Once those are winnowed off and your eggshells take on the color of caramelized garlic, so it's kind of a brown color. Even if they're brown eggshells, you'll see the inside of it will still turn that brown color. Okay, then they're done. They'll be tinkly, kind of like broken ceramic, so they'll have a sound, they'll have a look to it. The membrane will be off of it, and then you just put it in vinegar, 1:10 ratio. Simple. Let it set for about 10 days. It'll bubble. It's really fun to watch at the beginning. It's kind of like a, you know, natural farming lava lamp. And and keep it open. Okay, don't cover it. If you put a sealed lid on that thing is actually a chemical reaction creating gas, and it can explode. Okay, so like if you make a natural soda, I've had a natural soda that my ex's sister gave to us, ginger brew. She told us to keep it cool. We thought we were. It exploded, and like literally shards of glass were impaled all over our walls. It scarred the bottles next to it. It was insane. I was like, oh. So this can do that same thing if you seal it tightly. Don't seal it tightly until it's done reacting. Once it's done reacting, you can strain off the eggshells, and that's shelf stable indefinitely. And you use it at a 1 to 1,000 to 1 to 500 ratio. So if you're making 500 gallons, you put 1 gallon of this in there. So again, the cost of a gallon of vinegar, if you're buying, and don't use white vinegar, distilled white vinegar is not your best friend. You want to use a natural vinegar, so apple cider is easy to get. Rice vinegar you can get at the restaurant supply stores for like $2 a gallon. So you've just made a calcium supplement for your plants for $2 to create 500 gallons of input, if you're going to soil drench it. Yeah?
How long does this take?
It takes about 10 days for the reaction to stop. You can leave it for longer, it's not that big of a deal, but you want to make sure that all the bubbling has stopped. And literally the eggshells will be lifting and like moving through the column of vinegar. Like you'll watch them kind of spinning around. It's fascinating. And then the same process is used if you want to make a calcium phosphorus supplement. Okay, water soluble calcium phosphate, WSCP. Only you're going to use bones. So I'm hoping somebody talks about biochar today, but if not, just look it up. It's pretty simple. You're going to take bones from large animals. So a lot of times, like I can go to Fortuna, to the butcher there, and say like, hey, if you guys happen to have a box of cow bones that I could like buy from you for really cheap, that'd be amazing. Usually, last time I did that, they came out with these 3 massive boxes and shoved them in the car and went, have a nice day. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So same situation though, but you biochar the bone first. So you put it in, I actually bought a 5-gallon Dutch oven, cast iron, massive thing off of eBay. Found it for a steal for $100. I was like, this is amazing. So I put the bones in, I put the lid on, and I put it over a fire outside, and I keep feeding the fire. It takes about 4 to 6 hours for the biochar to be created. Once your bones are done, they're blackened on the inside, so you can literally like break them. They're very brittle. Sometimes there's a little bit of white ash on the outside, that's fine. If they're brown still, they're not done yet, so you can put it back on for a little while. But once they're done, again, 1 to 10 in vinegar, you now have a water-soluble calcium phosphate. So now you can use that towards the end of bloom. There's seriously, whatever NPK thing you want, there is a solution for it that costs you almost nothing. Micronutrients is seawater. Go get ocean water, 1 to 30 ratio. You can add it to any of your inputs. People are like, oh my God, salt. But the thing is, the NaCl in seawater is very minimal, and it's all balanced with the trace minerals and the micronutrients that are available in seawater itself. Really, really easy way to supplement micronutrients. Ideally, your soil is getting sweetened as you're doing this, so eventually you get to back off and you say everything that's available in the soil is now available to the plant because I have the microbiology to support it. I don't have to get seawater anymore. I don't know, I'm a little lost after the drive down here. This is my first time in this town, actually. It's really cute. So I don't know how far we are from the ocean. That might not be super feasible for you guys. So if it's not, you can buy sea salt. Make sure there's no caking agent in it. Okay, it needs to be straight sea salt. And you can use that with 1 gram per liter of your finished solution. So if you're gonna make 15 gallons of fertilizer spray, you're gonna put in 3.875 liters times 15 gallons, whatever that number is, that amount of grams. I'm not a mathematician, I'm a farmer. WSK, water soluble, K is potassium, right? So that charred sunflowers work really great. Same biochar process as you use for the bones, put in sunflowers instead. Ideally, the seed heads are the best part. They have the highest amount of potassium, Asparagus is another great one. You can look up online, if you look up Duke Dynamic Accumulator list, there's amazing lists out there online that you can look at that have the parts per million of each plant, what part of the plant, and it'll tell you what kind of nutrients that plant accumulates. Then you do have to know a little bit of chemistry and know whether something is water soluble, if it's soluble in an acid, or if it's soluble in a base. Okay, whichever one that is, if you're trying to get that nutrient out of that plant, you have to know how to make that available. So, for, again, calcium we already talked about, phosphorus we already talked about, potassium we're talking about now, it is water soluble. So if you biochar a plant that is an accumulator of potassium, you can pull that out of the plant by soaking it in water. Same ratio, 1 to 10, but you're using water instead of vinegar, and you're letting it sit for about 10 days. So, really quickly in your head, if you're thinking about how much money you spent on fertilizers and compost and, God forbid advanced nutrients, no offense if anybody uses it, not a fan. But, it's literally thousands and thousands, if not tens of $1,000s a year that you can just utilize quote unquote waste materials for free. And it's a great way to support your soil health, support your plant health, and support your financial sustainability, which if we're going to be farming 10 years from now, we have to be financially sustainable, or there's no point. Was there anything else in this? And if you guys have questions, like, please ask me, because definitely, you know, if I don't have an answer, I will let you know I don't know, and I'll tell you why.
What was the name of that list again?
Dynamic accumulators. And Duke, it's Professor Duke is the man who put it together. So he has two lists. One was an old list, and it was a matrix. I want to say Cornell University either tagged it or is through that or something, but he put together recently a newer one, because the original one just had like lettuce is a dynamic accumulator of potassium to the rate of, I think, like, it was massive, like 112,000 ppm or something. It was way bigger than anything else. But as time kind of went on, it was like, well, not all lettuce is hitting that number, and what part of the lettuce, and at what part of the growing stage is it? So the new one, he has ranges. He's like, you know, at the lower level, you'll see this, and at the higher level, you'll see this. So Duke is his name, dynamic accumulators list. There's usually the first thing that pops up on that Google is a article that was written by somebody, and in that article, you can find a hot link directly to the list as well. So it might take a little bit of scraping, but Duke, D-U-K-E, dynamic accumulator.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And dynamic accumulators, basically, these are plants that will take things out of the soil and accumulate it in their cells, so in their body themselves. And so then in order to get that back out of the plant, you know, again, there's different processes you can use. You can just add it to your compost too. Cucumber, by the way, happens to be a massive dynamic accumulator of potassium. I haven't tried biocharring a cucumber yet, but, you know, it's on my list of things to do at some point. Otherwise, you know, I just grind it up and add it to my compost.
So when you do the biocharring, are you adding any sort of liquid or anything else?
No.
Or just dry bones?
No.
For 4 to 6 hours.
Yep. And the bones I usually do on so the first time I did it, I just used my grill, and I literally just put them on the grill, because unless you boil them first, they'll have fats on them. So, you know, you want to have all that fat be able to come off of it. So an open container usually works a little better for bones unless you've boiled them first and gotten all the proteins off. Also, when you're doing biochar, if you do have like a Dutch oven that's closed, wait for it to cool to open it. If you open it, when you're making biochar, there's something called cis gas that can be created, and it's extremely flammable. So if you open it up and it's full of that gas, it can explode. So be careful, like, you know, what we learned, and also if your biocharing isn't completely combusted yet, the addition of oxygen can make it catch fire too, which kind of ruins it. So biochar is the act of creating char in the absence of oxygen. We're not burning it with oxygen, so it's not combusting. It's literally just breaking everything down. But do be careful, because we don't want to catch fire. So, so take it off the heat. For me, I usually I keep feeding the fire for like, 4 hours, and then I walk away and come back the next day and, lift it up. And I have had times where it wasn't done. I'm like, oh great, I'm just gonna do it all over again. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there ever an opportunity where you would be hosting actual hands-on courses for these kinds of processes?
Yes. There is. I have been trying to figure timing for years now, but my amazing partner James is just like helping me organizing things. So we will be hosting hands-on classes in Southern Humboldt County on the farm. It will be KNF for cannabis specific, but it is the same process for all plants, vegetables, fruit trees, human bodies, literally animals, livestock, dogs, cats, you name it. Everything is the same. But we have found that cannabis has a different nutrition cycle than most other plants. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been getting it perfected. So I do have 2 feeding schedules, if you will, because people are like, I need a feeding schedule. I'm like, oh, I really want you guys to learn how to read the plants, because feeding schedules get us into a really kind of lazy farmer mentality, and then when things go wrong, we don't really know why. But if you're paying attention to your plants, you're like, oh, I recognize this is that. Oh, I recognize this is, a deficiency. This is not russet mites. Oh, I recognize this is russet mites. So I have two schedules. One is for plant whisperers, that's just a general, here's your ranges and your average times, and then one that is for beginners. It's like if you really are not comfortable, you're gonna follow it specifically. So that will be available at the class. Summer. We'll be doing this. The first one will be in summer, and it is 5 days. So you do need to kind of be able to be away. From here, we're a 2.5 hour drive, so it's a ways. There will be camping at the farm. It's pretty rugged, but it's going to be easier for people to try and do that than renting, a hotel. Garberville's really expensive for hotels. We're talking $200 a night, so I don't want people to not come because they can't afford $1,000 in hotel bills. So yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, you guys go. I've asked no questions.
Are you inoculating a biochar?
I don't use bio for the product for the inputs.
Or the accumulating biochar in the bones?
No. So what we're doing with those inputs, so when we're making water-soluble potassium or water-soluble calcium phosphate, we're not inoculating the biochar because you're not actually using it. You actually strain that off. And the bones they kind of turn into mush. Like literally the vinegar will pull all of the calcium and phosphorus out of the bones themselves, and the bone gets kind of mushy and gross, and then you're just using the liquid portion. Same thing with the sunflowers. Like the sunflowers actually will turn to ash at the bottom, like kind of charcoaly ash, and then you're just using the liquid portion.
I just want to point out that the bones are done in the open air and they're not.
You can't do biochar. You can do them in a sealed environment if you boil them first. But you got to get all this stuff, and it takes longer.
The semantics disturb me. I'm used to biochar being wood that has been burned without oxygen, which creates a matrix that you inoculate with.
Right.
And you're not doing that at all.
No, so we're using biochar in this sense as a verb, if you will. Like we're biocharing the bones. It's simply, biochar technically, to my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, is the process of creating a char in the absence of oxygen.
Pyrolysis.
Exactly. So when we're doing that, it doesn't matter what your beginning material is, you can do it with anything. And I could be wrong because I don't actually use biochar in the traditional wood sense. I found that I did a little playing with it and some trials and side-by-sides very early on, and what I found was that on my farm it made no difference. I had inoculated biochar, I had non-inoculated biochar, and I had non-biochar areas. Literally zero difference between them. My friend Steve has done similar in Kenya, I believe he was, where he did acres of hemp and found no difference between the biochar inoculated areas and the areas that didn't. But a lot of that has to do with your beginning soil. Do you have organic material, and if so, how much? Are you amending? How are you amending? For us, we had like 10 to 15% organic material starting. So, adding a little bit of biochar didn't really make a difference for us. We also have highly microbiologically diverse and active soil. So the addition of more in biochar didn't make a difference. I've tried out all kinds of microbial inoculants that you buy, right? People love sending to me. Try my Bigfoot mycorrhiza, try this, try, back in the day, what was the elephant, mammoth pea. There's zero difference. I don't get any discernible difference unless it's in a pot. Okay, if it's in a pot, sure, because you don't have a functional soil food web inside of that pot. It's generally too small of a volume. So in that case, continual inoculation with a microbial, component does make a difference. But once it's in a living soil bed, that stuff is superfluous. I also highly suspect of anything that says that you have to add it like every single watering. If it's a microbial inoculant, you're adding life. That life should be self-propagating. It should, if it's happy where you've put it, it's gonna breed, it's gonna create more life. If you're having to add it every single week, to me, that just raises a flag of that microbiology isn't happy there. And if it's not happy there, why isn't it happy there? Why isn't it doing its own thing? Why isn't it continuing to create more colony units? Maybe something's out of whack, maybe something isn't correct, maybe it's not the right microbiology for where I live. This is why IMO is so key, because you're taking literally the biology that's already functional, diverse, and happy in your area, and you're just bringing it into a spot that it's not. And ideally, it's not even ideally, what happens is the more you do that, the better your soil gets, the more diversity you get, the stronger your plants get, and the easier everything gets. Pest pressure, people are like, what do you use for pesticides? I'm like, we don't. I mean, I have a homemade soap that is there in a pinch. If I get something, usually it's the clones come with aphids, or, I have people at the farm and I'm not as cautious as I should be. Like, when I have clients, I'm like, okay, you guys need to have the little paper suits and you need to have the shoe thing and you need, if people are coming onto your farm, you need to tell them they need to come in with fresh clothes from a shower. Don't go into your own grow. Don't go to your friend's house before you come to mine. I'm pretty lackadaisical on my own farm. I'm like, hey, you want to touch the plant? Go for it. Hey, you want to walk through the fields? I don't care. Oh, you bring your own grow? Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm probably gonna get bugs, but that's fine because I'm open air. I have a really strong soil system going. The plants hardly ever show pest pressure, and even when they do, it usually gets self-mitigated. So like last year, I had people that came out and they're like, oh, you have thrips. And I'm like, oh, look at that. Sure enough, I do. Everybody's like, what are you gonna do? I'm like, I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna see what happens. In general, thrips don't really cause much damage. So we sat, we watched it. After about a month, the wind and the difference in the rain and the temperatures and everything else, they were pretty much gone. Hemp aphids are the one thing that I'm like, that one you probably want to battle right away. Those tend to be difficult to get ahead of because they breed so stupid fast. And russet mites too are, there's not a natural predator for russet mites. So if you get russet mites, you do have to do something for that. Again, JWA, Jadon Wetting Agent, it's a homemade soap, costs about $2 a gallon to make. You use it at a 1:50 ratio. It's a Castile soap. It's basically Dr. Bronner's. You can add essential oils to it if you want. Super cheap, super effective, especially against your soft-bodied insects. Aphids, they die. The one weird thing, and you'll panic if you guys ever have to do this, because everybody does, we all have heart attacks, is you spray it in the heat of the day, which feels very, very counterintuitive. You want the heat. I'm pretty sure I went home and just was like laying on the floor and was like, it just killed everything. This is really bad. I can't believe I did that. But it worked great. Also, if you look up, there is a DIY of Lost Coast Plant Therapy. I love Lost Coast Plant Therapy. I know the people who created it. They're a phenomenal family. They're wonderful. 18,000 square feet, I cannot afford that. It is really expensive. You can make it yourself. It's extremely effective. I had a farmer friend of mine that I gave the recipe to last year that she had russet mites. She'd been battling and she could not get rid of them. She made this, she used it, she reported back like 3 weeks later, was like, holy cow, they're gone. Like this worked amazing. And I think I spent like $10 on the whole process. So again, just kind of thinking about the finances of all of this, thinking about ways to take something that works and, how do you do it cheaper? Which is generally not buying a bottle of something. Did you have a question too, Kristen?
I do, I always have questions. Probably why I put the whole thing. So because we're in like such a big, large capacity here for growing cannabis, there's so many large scale operations. With Sunnabis, your company, I hate to put you on the spot, but maybe something you could consider maybe offering some kind of consultation to these large scale regenerative minded folks that are doing commercial conventional farming that would like to try some inputs. And there's a second part to the question. If they were to, because this is a lot, like there's a mixed group of folks here, people who've never done regenerative farming practices, people who have done like some dabbled a little bit. What's this, because I remember when I met you, actually you didn't know I met you, but I went to the Regenerative Soil Conference like in Garberville a while ago when Chris Trump was there, and like you were doing these trials, and I remember like listening to you. And one of the things that I think is so interesting and something that we really need to focus on in these areas where we're doing like acres and acres of industrial farming is like, how do we get that information to these larger scale operators who actually want to do better work in the future, and what are the steps, and if they were gonna start, where would they start?
So I do consultations. I've stepped into that very slowly because I'm very cautious, and my biggest fear is telling people to do something and then having it like destroy their farm, and I'm like, oh my God, that's my fault. Regardless of NDAs and paperwork and contracts and things that hold me not liable, I would still feel liable. So as I've kind of gotten my feet into consulting, I found that I actually really love it. It does require boots on ground. That is the one thing I'll say, is that everybody I've tried to help like online or through like, here's your steps. What works on my farm doesn't necessarily work on your farm. What works on your farm won't necessarily work on your neighbor's farm. Everything is dependent upon the systems you already have in place, where you're coming from, and where you're at already. So hiring a consultant that actually knows what they're doing is really key. There's not a ton of KNF consultants that have been doing this for long enough with cannabis to actually, be able to do it efficiently. I get calls from people and Instagram messages a lot of like, so I hired this person. It always starts with so, and then it follows with a bunch of pictures of catastrophic, I just things that I'm like, oh my God. And then with the, can you please help me? Unfortunately, usually at that point, there's not much that can be done. Quite often, I'm like, you're 3 weeks from harvest, just cut losses and, don't do that again. So yeah, but as far as where to start in general, so it depends, again, site specific. Are you inside? Are you outside? Are you in closed greenhouses? Are you in open air light depth? These are all things that definitely direct, how to start. In general, if you're in pots, get out of your pots. If you're in pots because your soil is bad, so this is one of my other clients that I consulted with, they were in those smart pots, and I'm like, why are you on the pot? Like, what's going on here? You've got beautiful soil, I don't understand. I'm like, well, we had cadmium issues, and we had, I think, arsenic or one of the other heavy metals. And we figured out it was in the soil, and I was like, okay, well, let's figure out why it's in the soil. Is it actually in your soil, or is it coming from your water system? Right? Because now they had a big RO system, and they're like, well, we put all of this in and we did all this mitigation, like you might as well be inside. Like you're not really doing a lot for anything by being in pots on the ground up above. So at that point, what we did is we said, what you should be doing is mitigating in between your pots. So go ahead and start planting things that will accumulate those heavy metals and remove those plants from the site. So hemp actually is phenomenal. Hemp is a dynamic accumulator of a lot of gnarly, crazy things. So if you take that plant and you plant it in the ground, it'll pull all that stuff up and then remove it. The other thing is there are a lot of fungi that actually will mitigate heavy metal. There's a great article about cadmium. There's certain species of bacteria and fungi that literally reduce the amount of cadmium that's in your soil. For Humboldt County, cadmium is our biggest problem. I think it's the same down here, I'm not positive. And this is for farmlands. Once you get into the city type, you got all kinds of other issues. But again, leave your pots there so that you can make sure your crop is going to test clean and you'll be fine. Start mitigating in between. And then when your soil is starting to test better, if it's your soil and not your water, then you can dump your pots over, start incorporating your potting soil into your native soil, and have actually a really amazing process. That's what we ended up with on my farm. So I stepped away from the farm for a few years to raise my kids, and kind of got bullied into putting in like hundreds of those smart pots of potting soil. Potting soil is horrible, you guys. It's a necessary evil for starting seeds, it's a necessary evil for certain aspects, but like literally giant smart pots full of potting soil, your texture of your soil is limited. Even if you're doing no-till, you lose the texture, it starts getting compressed, it's just not great. Even if you're the large ones, your soil food web is gonna be different in each pot. So you're literally, if you're gonna do this regeneratively, you're gonna have to test every single pot. If you got, 200, 2,000, this is not realistic. Your efficiency is like right down the tubes. So, as people that have to be aware of the financial, constraints of this industry, again, efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. So as soon as you can, get out of the pots, get it into the ground. The soil has all those micronutrients, right? Available and free. So get your soil food web functional, get your, fungi involved, get things up to where cannabis likes to be. So, there are people that say there's a perfect zone of bacterial to fungal ratio. I think somebody just, Elaine actually, Dr. Elaine Ingham has something out that she's like, okay, it's like 1.3 to, it's weird. And I'm like, I don't know how you're getting that specific on these bacterial to fungal ratios and how anybody could realistically get them that dialed in. The reality is, the more fungally dominant my soil gets, the easier this gets. Like, as long as you're putting a healthy plant in that's not struggling, literally, you plant it in the ground and you just sit back. And it's a really simple process. It's easier to scale up. For those large cultivators that you're talking about that want to do this regeneratively, it actually becomes a lot easier the further you go down. So the first year is always kind of like this mind-blowing thing where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is insane. I have so many there's this and that. It's just because it's new. It's just a new process. But by year 2, they're like, oh, this is easier. And then by year 3, it's like, okay, now I know my pinch points are things I didn't expect. So there's a vineyard that is doing Korean natural farming. They started its Hill Valley Estate, I think, Leslie and Doug, and they manage 700 acres of vines in Napa.
It's in Yountville, right?
Huh?
It's in Yountville.
In Yountville, yes.
Yes.
So the first year they trialed 1 acre. And what they found was, and she was doing amazing things. She was like hand dipping grape clusters in lactic acid bacteria serum to see if she could mitigate the powdery mildew, which worked, but yeah, that's never, again, efficiency, not so much. So then they were trying spraying, and maybe that wasn't quite as effective, but it was effective enough and cost effective enough that after the first year, they said, we're going to increase from a 1 acre trial to a 10 acre trial. And that was last year. And last year got crazy for vines. There was late frost, there was fire, there was drought, there was everything that can hit a farmer basically hit them. And she was disappointed, I think at the end. She was like, oh, it wasn't like, I really wanted it to be more. But the vines on the 10 acre trial were still doing better than the other vines. So it was enough that I think this year they're trying to scale up again. But her pinch points were, it's 750 acres in a whole bunch of different vineyards. So how do you get some of these things from one place to another, to another, to another, to another? So for her, it wasn't a matter of how you use it and how effective it is. For her, it's more just, pinch points of movement and, isolation of different things. So, if you are a large-scale farmer down here and you've got 20 acres, it's pretty simple to set up the system and have it start being really, really easy.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Wendy.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you guys have questions, if you guys have other questions, I'm always available online. You can don't email me because I get a ton of emails, they get lost. Instagram, honestly, direct message via Instagram. It's Sunnabis, Sunnabis. I'm pretty responsive on that. And if you dig through my Instagram, I go through a lot of this stuff in different aspects of it. So thank you guys all very much. Have a good day.